Ex-veteran is called to court, but when they say his name, everything stops. Richard Anderson felt the weight of every gaze when the bailiff opened the side door and led him into the courtroom. The 58-year-old man walked with steady but weary steps to the center of the hall. He wore a faded olive green shirt he had bought at a thrift store 3 years earlier when his life began to fall apart. The sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing arms marked by time and hard labor. His calloused, trembling hands remained clasped in front of him as he waited. "Case number 2024-0847, announced the clerk, adjusting her glasses as she read the document. "Paternity recognition and inheritance rights lawsuit filed by Melissa Carter against—" The woman paused. Her eyes scanned the name on the old paper once, twice, 3 times. Richard noticed when she swallowed hard and looked at the judge with a strange expression. "Continue, please," ordered the magistrate, a grey-haired man in his 60s who had presided over hearings in that family court for more than 2 decades. "Against—" the clerk cleared her throat. "Captain Richard Morrison Blackwood." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard saw the judge drop the pen he was holding. In the front row, an elderly woman observing the proceedings brought a hand to her chest. 2 lawyers whispering in the corner of the room immediately stopped their conversation. "That name," someone murmured in the back. "It can't be," whispered another. Richard kept his gaze fixed on the polished marble floor. He knew this moment would come. After 23 years living as Richard Anderson, a retired mechanic and ordinary man, his past had finally caught up with him. The past he had tried to bury along with the memories of a war few Americans even knew had happened. Melissa Carter, the 32-year-old woman seated across the room, watched everything with wide eyes. She had hired the best law firm in New York City to sue the man she believed was just some random veteran, someone her late mother had mentioned on her deathbed as her real father. Melissa wanted her share of the small military pension and perhaps some belated acknowledgement. But now, seeing the reaction of everyone in the room, she was beginning to realize there was much more to this story. "Your Honor." Richard's voice broke the silence, hoarse and controlled. "I prefer to be called Richard Anderson. It's the name I've used for over 2 decades. The judge adjusted his glasses, still visibly shaken. "Mr. Anderson, do you have documents legally proving this identity change?" "I do, Your Honor. It's all in the records. Change authorized in 2001, right after my return from the mission in Somalia." "Mission in Somalia?" Melissa stood abruptly, ignoring her lawyer's protests. "What mission? My mother said you were just an ordinary soldier." Richard finally raised his eyes and met the young woman's gaze, the same greenish-brown eyes as Hannah's, the same determined chin, the same forehead that furrowed when she was confused. It was impossible to deny the resemblance. "Sit down, Miss Carter," ordered the judge. "Let's maintain order in this hearing. But before we proceed—" He turned to Richard. "Are you truly Captain Richard Morrison Blackwood? The same one who—" "Yes, Your Honor, the same. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out." Now continuing. New murmurs spread through the room. Richard could feel the weight of curiosity, astonishment, perhaps even a certain reverence that his real name still evoked. That was exactly why he had chosen to live in anonymity all these years. But now facing the daughter he never knew, there was no more running away. "We need a recess," declared the judge, still unsettled. 15 minutes. Dr. Mitchell," he addressed Melissa's lawyer, "I suggest you speak with your client. This hearing may take turns none of us expected." As people began to rise and whisper among themselves, Richard remained motionless. His memories returned to that fateful day in Mogadishu when everything changed. When Captain Richard Morrison Blackwood, a decorated Special Forces officer, made a decision that would save dozens of lives but destroy his own career and reputation. Melissa watched him from the plaintiff's table, clearly torn between the anger she felt and curiosity about who this man really was. Her lawyer, Dr. Mitchell, approached her with a pale face. "Melissa, we need to talk. Do you know who Richard Morrison Blackwood is?" "No. All I know is he's the man who abandoned my pregnant mother 32 years ago." "Melissa," the lawyer lowered his voice, He's a war hero, or was, until he disappeared from official records. He saved 43 Somali children during a clash with militants in 2000. He disobeyed direct orders, put his own unit at risk, but saved those children. He was decorated, but then vanished. No one knew what happened to him. Richard overheard the conversation. That wasn't quite how it happened, but he was too tired to correct it. The truth was far more complex, far more painful, and now he'd have to tell it, not just to the court, but to the daughter he never knew existed. The recess passed quickly. When everyone returned to their seats, the atmosphere in the room had completely shifted. This was no longer just a paternity hearing. It was the unraveling of a mystery many believed lost to time. "Let's resume," announced the judge. "Mr. Anderson, or Captain Blackwood, do you acknowledge the possibility of being the biological father of the plaintiff?" Richard took a deep breath. He remembered Hannah, the 1 month they spent together before he left for his first international mission. She was a nurse at the military hospital in Boston. He, a young officer full of ideals and dreams of serving his country. "I do, Your Honor. Hannah Carter and I had a brief relationship in 1992. I was 26, just promoted to lieutenant. She was 23, but I didn't know about the pregnancy. I swear to God I didn't." "Why not?" Melissa exploded. "Why did you never try to find out?" "Because 3 days after the last time I saw your mother, I was sent to Liberia, classified mission. For 2 years I couldn't communicate with anyone in the United States. When I returned..." Richard paused. The memory still hurt. "When I returned, I looked for her, but I was told Hannah had married and moved to rural Pennsylvania, that she was happy, that she had a family. I had no right to show up and ruin that." "Liar!" Gay Melissa slammed her hand on the table. "My mother never married. She raised me alone, struggling to survive while you played hero around the world." "Melissa, calm down," her lawyer urged. "No, I've waited my whole life to confront this man. My mother died 6 months ago, Doctor. Do you know what she told me in the hospital? That my father was an extraordinary man who'd saved many lives. That I should be proud of him, even if he was never present. I thought it was the morphine. Talking, but no, she knew who you were all along." But Richard felt the weight of those words. Hannah had known. Somehow she'd discovered his identity change, his new life, and she'd chosen to keep it a secret. "Your Honor," interrupted Richard's attorney, Dr. Samantha Reynolds, a professional-looking woman in her 40s, "my client is willing to take the DNA test and, if paternity is confirmed, assume all legal responsibilities. But we need to clarify some points regarding the inheritance matter mentioned in the petition." "What inheritance?" Richard turned to his lawyer, confused. "I live off a small pension and what I earn fixing cars in my home garage." It was Melissa's turn to look uncomfortable. "It's not about your money. It's about the Morrison Blackwood inheritance, your family, the family you apparently abandoned along with your name." Richard's blood ran cold. The family he hadn't seen in over 20 years. The family he believed had forgotten him too. "My family disowned me when I disobeyed orders in Somalia. I was very clear about that." "Your father died 2 years ago," Melissa revealed, watching his reaction closely. "He left a notarized letter stating that if you appeared within the next 10 years, you'd be entitled to your share of the inheritance. 40% of Morrison Blackwood Enterprises." The room erupted in murmurs. Morrison Blackwood Enterprises was a conglomerate worth hundreds of millions. Richard felt his legs weaken. "That's impossible. My father told me I was dead to him." "It seems he changed his mind," Melissa continued, her voice softer now. "And as his only heir, if paternity is confirmed, I'd be entitled to a portion of it. But I'm not just here for the money. I need to understand why the hero who saved 43 children in Somalia couldn't be there for his own daughter." The judge intervened before Richard could respond. "I see this hearing has taken on dimensions far beyond a simple paternity acknowledgement. I propose we reschedule for 30 days from now, enough time for the DNA test to be completed and for both parties to prepare properly. Mr. Anderson, I suggest you look into this inheritance matter. And Miss Carter." He paused. "Perhaps it would be wise to hear the full story before passing judgment." "I'll take the test immediately," Richard declared. "And as for the story," he looked at Melissa, "if you want to hear it, I'll tell you. Not the heroic version the newspapers printed, the truth. But I warn you, it's not pretty." Melissa nodded slowly. There was something in the man's eyes, a deep pain she recognized, the same one she saw in the mirror every morning. The hearing ended, but no one seemed in a hurry to leave. Richard walked slowly toward the door, but was intercepted by an elderly woman in the audience. "Richard, is it really you?" Richard recognized her immediately. Mrs. Martha Sullivan, wife of General Sullivan, his former commanding officer. "Mrs. Sullivan, my God, it is you. We all thought you had—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Arnold searched for you for years. He never believed the official story of what happened in Somalia." "The official story was necessary, ma'am." "Nonsense! You saved those children. You were a hero." "No, ma'am, I was a soldier who made a decision, and I paid the price for it." Melissa approached, curious. "What really happened in Somalia?" Mrs. Sullivan looked between Richard and Melissa, noticing the resemblance. "You're his daughter, apparently." The elderly woman smiled sadly. "So Hannah had the baby. Arnold suspected. She called the barracks a few times looking for Richard, but they always said he was on a mission. You knew my mother. Briefly. A beautiful girl, full of life. Richard was devastated when they told him she'd married. I think that's why he accepted so many dangerous missions afterward." Richard tried to pull away, but Melissa held his arm. "No, you're not running away again. I want to know everything. About Somalia, about my mother, about why you chose to live as someone else." "Melissa, some things are better left buried." "No, my mother died whispering your real name. She never told me who you really were, but she kept every newspaper clipping about Captain Richard Morrison Blackwood. I found a box full of them after she died, so don't tell me it's better left buried." Mrs. Martha Sullivan gently intervened. "My house is 2 blocks from here. Why don't we all go for coffee? Arnold is there. I'm sure he'd be happy to see you, Richard. And maybe it's time to tell the whole truth." Richard looked at Melissa. In his daughter's eyes he saw the same determination Hannah had, the same one that had won him over 32 years ago. "Fine, but after this we go our separate ways. I didn't come here for an inheritance or redemption. I came because I was summoned." "We'll see," Melissa replied, her tone defiant. "First, I want to hear the story. All of it." As they left the courthouse, Richard couldn't help but notice the irony of fate. He had run from the name Richard Morrison Blackwood for over 2 decades, building a simple, anonymous life as Richard Anderson. But all it took was a court summons for everything to crumble. Or perhaps, he thought, watching Melissa walk determinedly. Beside him, maybe it was time to stop running. The Sullivans' house was exactly as Richard remembered. An elegant townhouse in the Upper East Side, with an immaculate garden that Mrs. Martha tended to herself. Stepping inside, he was immediately transported to another time, when he still believed in honor, duty, and country above all else. "Arnold," Mrs. Martha called, "we have guests." General Sullivan, now 80 but still imposing, appeared in the living room. When he saw Richard, his eyes widened. "My God! Richard?" "General." The 2 men stared at each other for long seconds. Then, to everyone's surprise, the old soldier stepped forward and hugged Richard tightly. "You stubborn fool, 23 years, 23 years without a word. You know why. I know nothing. I know you made the right call and were crucified for it. If I'd been in your place, I'd have done the same." Melissa watched with growing curiosity. This general, clearly an important figure, treated her father with a mix of respect and paternal affection. "Sit down," Mrs. Martha gestured to the sofa. "I'll make coffee. Melissa, dear, do you like orange cake?" Yes, thank you." Once everyone was settled, a heavy silence filled the room. It was Melissa who broke it. "Can someone finally tell me what happened in Somalia? Why is my father treated as both a hero and a deserter?" General Sullivan looked at Richard, silently asking for permission. Richard nodded, weary. "Your daughter?" the general asked first. "Apparently we'll do the test, but—" Richard glanced at Melissa. "She's the spitting image of her mother. Hannah Carter. I remember her. Good nurse. It was a shame about the misunderstanding with—" The marriage. Misunderstanding? Melissa leaned forward. We'll get to that later, Richard cut in. She wants to know about Somalia. The general took a deep breath. December 2000. Your father commanded a special unit in Mogadishu, a UN peacekeeping mission, but the situation was far from peaceful. Militias controlled parts of the city, and we were there to maintain order and protect civilians. There was an orphanage Richard took over, his voice distant, St. Mary's Home. 43 children, ages 3 to 15. It was in a neutral zone, but the militias respected. Nothing. One morning we got word that an armed group was planning to attack the orphanage. Why would they attack children? Melissa asked, horrified. Some of those children were daughters of rival militia members. Others had witnessed crimes. In Somalia at that time, being a child was no guarantee of safety. The protocol was clear, the general continued. We couldn't intervene without authorization from the UN command. It was a delicate, politically complex situation. Richard received direct orders to hold position and wait. But I couldn't. Richard closed his eyes. I couldn't stand by knowing 43 children would be slaughtered, so I disobeyed. I took my unit and we went to the orphanage. The confrontation was brutal, the general added. 6 hours of gunfire. Richard and his men held their position until UN reinforcements finally arrived. Not a single child was hurt. Then why? Melissa began. Because 3 American soldiers died, Richard replied, guilt evident in his voice. 3 men under my command. 3 family men who came home in coffins because I decided Somali children's lives were worth more than following orders. The silence that followed was heavy. Melissa processed the information, trying to reconcile the image of the hero with the tormented man before her. The military command was in an impossible position, the general explained. On one hand, Richard had saved 43 children, and international public opinion saw him as a hero. On the other, he had disobeyed direct orders, resulting in the deaths of American soldiers. The solution was to give me a choice, Richard continued. A court-martial, where I'd likely be acquitted, but the dirty details would come to light, or accept a quiet retirement and disappear. Dirty details. Richard and the general exchanged glances. The UN command knew about the attack. There was an unofficial agreement not to intervene. Politics, Melissa. Always politics. If that got out, it would be an international scandal. So you were the scapegoat. I was the convenient solution. Hero to some, traitor to others, and forgotten by most. Mrs. Sullivan returned with the tray of coffee and cake. The familiar aroma brought back more memories for Richard. But why change your name? Why live in hiding? Melissa pressed. You don't understand. Richard accepted the coffee cup with trembling hands. My family, the Morrison. Blackwoods have a 5-generation military tradition. My father was a colonel, my grandfather a general. When news of my disgrace reached them, I was publicly disowned. My father said I had tarnished the family name. He regretted it, Melissa revealed. The letter he left searching for you. Too late, Richard shook his head. I was already Richard Anderson, a mechanic, a simple man with no past. And my mother, how does she fit into this? It was Mrs. Sullivan who answered. Your father was devastated when he returned. From Somalia. Arnold tried to locate him several times, but he'd vanished. Then about a year later, Hannah showed up here. Richard's head snapped up. Hannah was here? Yes, with a baby just months old. You, dear. She smiled at Melissa. She'd learned about Somalia, about Richard's disappearance. She wanted to know if we had any news of him. Why didn't anyone tell me? Richard stood, agitated. Because you didn't want to be found, the general replied firmly. You sent that letter saying Richard Morrison Blackwood was dead and that we shouldn't look for you. What was I supposed to do? Betray your trust? Melissa watched her father pace the room like a caged animal. She was beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. Did my mother know you were alive? We neither confirmed nor denied, Mrs. Sullivan said gently. But Hannah was a smart woman. I think she understood. She said if Richard ever wanted to meet his daughter, she'd be waiting. And she waited, Melissa said softly. Her whole life. She never married, never had other children. She... Always said my father was an honorable man who had to make difficult choices. Richard stopped walking, leaning against the window. The funny thing is, the misunderstanding about the marriage, it must have been Parker. Sergeant Parker served with me. When I asked about Hannah, he said he'd heard she'd gotten married. I never questioned it, just accepted it. It was easier that way. Easier? Melissa stood up, anger rising. Easier to abandon everything? Pretend we didn't exist? I didn't. No, you existed. But you knew my mother did. You could have checked. You could have found out the truth. For what? Richard turned, his eyes filled with pain. To offer her what? A broken man with no name, no honor, no future. Hannah deserved better than that. She deserved the truth. I deserved a father. The confrontation between father and daughter was interrupted by Melissa's phone ringing. She glanced at the screen and answered quickly. Yes, what? Are you sure? All right, thank you. When she hung up, she was pale. That was my lawyer. He did a deeper search into the inheritance. It seems it's not just about the businesses. What else? Richard asked wearily. Your father left a condition. For you to claim the inheritance, you must publicly take back the name Morrison Blackwood and... She hesitated. Assume the presidency of the Morrison Blackwood Institute. The Institute? The general said, surprised. But that's a support. Center for War Veterans and their families, Melissa finished. Founded 5 years ago, apparently as your father's way of making amends. He made it clear, either Richard Morrison Blackwood takes over as president, or the institute closes in 6 months. Richard felt the world spin. His father, the man who had disowned him, had spent the last years of his life building exactly the kind of institution Richard would have supported. It was too cruel to be a coincidence. How many families does the institute serve? He asked, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. Currently about 300. Veterans with PTSD, widows, orphans. If it closes, they'll have no support, Richard finished. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, Melissa watched the conflict on her father's face. It was obvious he was torn between his desire for a simple life and his responsibility to those families. It's a trap, Richard muttered. Typical of the old man. Even dead, he found a way to force me back. Or perhaps, Mrs. Martha suggested gently, he found a way to apologize, to say he was wrong. The Institute does important work, the general added. I've visited a few times. Your father was truly committed to it. He used to say it was his way of honoring the real heroes. Including you, Melissa said to her father. There's an entire wing dedicated to the heroes of Somalia, with your photo and everything. Richard sank into the couch, defeated. Did he know where I was? Probably, the general admitted. Your father had resources. If he'd wanted to find you, he would have. I think he respected your choice to stay away. Until now, Melissa observed, until he used 300 families as bargaining chips. It's not fair, Richard protested. I never asked for any of this. I just wanted to live in peace, fix my cars, grow old without ghosts from the past. And meanwhile, my mother raised a child alone, always waiting, always believing you'd show up one day. Melissa replied bitterly. Melissa, Mrs. Martha interjected, your mother was a strong woman. She made choices too. She could have searched. For Richard, more actively, could have demanded recognition. She chose not to do it, because she respected him, Melissa admitted reluctantly. She always said true love sometimes means letting the person go. Richard looked at his daughter with new eyes. Hannah had raised a strong, determined, yet compassionate young woman. Even in anger, Melissa tried to understand. What do you want from me, Melissa? Really? The question caught the young woman by surprise. She thought for a long moment. I want to know my father. Not the hero, not the deserter, not the heir. I want to know the man my mother loved. The man she waited for her whole life. And what if that man no longer exists? If all that's left is this ghost? Then I want to help bring him back, Melissa replied firmly. For me, for you, and for the 300 families who depend on the Institute. Richard. studied his daughter's face. The determination in her eyes was all too familiar. It was the same look he had when he decided to disobey orders to save 43 children. The DNA test. Just a formality, Melissa interrupted. I know you're my father. I knew the moment I saw your reaction when they said your real name in court. I saw the same fear my mother had whenever someone brought it up. Fear. Of not being enough, of failing the people you loved. She carried that to the end. Melissa's words hit Richard like a punch. Hannah had suffered too, bearing the weight of his absence. And now his daughter stood before him, offering not just forgiveness but a chance at redemption. If I do this, he began slowly, if I become Richard Morrison Blackwood again, take over the Institute, it won't be easy. The media will dredge up the whole Somalia story. They'll question, judge, expose every detail. I'll be by your side, Melissa said simply. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're a man who put the lives of unknown children above your own career. I know you carried the guilt for 3 soldiers' deaths for 23 years. I know you loved my mother enough to walk away thinking it was best for her. I may not like all those choices, but I understand them. General Sullivan cleared his throat. Richard, there's something else you should know about the 3 soldiers who died in Somalia. Richard stiffened. What about them? Their families. All 3 are supported by the Institute. Their widows, their children. Your father made sure of it personally. The silence that followed was profound. Richard covered his face with his hands, his shoulders trembling slightly. Melissa instinctively moved closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. He knew, Richard murmured. The old man knew this would hit me harder than anything else. The families hold no grudge, the general continued gently. I've spoken with them over the years. They understand it was an impossible situation. Those soldiers' children grew up knowing their fathers died saving children. There's honor in that. Honor, Richard repeated bitterly. It always comes back to that, doesn't it? For your family, yes, Melissa observed, but maybe it's time to define honor your own way. Mrs. Sullivan, who had been quiet for a while, stood up. I think we all have a lot to process today. Melissa, dear, would you like to join us for dinner? We can continue talking in a less heavy setting. Melissa looked at Richard. Say yes, he said. Mrs. Sullivan is an excellent cook, and I think we still have much to discuss. During dinner, the atmosphere gradually grew less tense. Melissa heard stories about young Richard, his dreams and ideals. Richard, in turn, heard about Hannah, how she had raised Melissa with love and dedication, always planting seeds of pride for her absent father. She kept your uniform, Melissa revealed as they ate, the one you wore when you first met. She starched and ironed it every year, as if you might walk back in at any moment. Richard had to fight back tears. Hannah had waited. All those years she had waited. How did she find out my current name? Where I was? Melissa hesitated. I'm not sure, but I found bus tickets to Philadelphia for the last 3 years. 1 each year, always on your birthday. Richard froze. Philadelphia was where he lived, where he had his small workshop. She went to see you, Melissa continued. She never approached you, but she went. She'd come back saying you looked well, that you were at peace, said it was enough. My God. Richard pushed his plate away, unable to keep eating. All this time, she loved you, Melissa said simply. Until the end. Your real name was the last thing she said. General Sullivan cleared his throat, gently shifting the subject. If you decide to take over the Institute, Richard, you'll have my full support. I still have influence in certain circles. We can minimize the media circus. And I can help with the legal side, Melissa offered. I'm a lawyer specializing in family law, but I have connections. You're assuming I'll accept. You will, Melissa said confidently, because it's the right thing to do. And deep down, you've always done the right thing, even when it hurt. Richard looked around the table. The General and Mrs. Sullivan, who had been like parents to him when his own family rejected him. Melissa, the daughter he never knew he had, offering forgiveness and a chance to start over. I need time to think. Of course, Melissa agreed, but not too much time. The Institute needs a decision in 30 days. Always deadlines. Richard murmured. Always impossible decisions with impossible deadlines. Welcome to life, the general toasted with his wine glass. It's better than the alternative. After dinner, Richard offered to walk Melissa to her car. They strolled in silence through the tree-lined streets of the Upper East Side, each lost in thought. You know, Melissa broke the silence, I grew up hating you. Not you specifically, but the idea of you. The absent father, the man who chose everything but family. It's understandable, but my mother never allowed it. Whenever I complained, she'd tell me a story about courage, about sacrifice. Now I realize they were your stories, disguised. They reached Melissa's car, a practical sedan that matched her personality. What happens now? Richard asked. Now, we do the DNA test to make it official. You think about the institute, and maybe we can try to get to know each other. No rush, no pressure, just try. Richard nodded, too moved to speak. Oh, and Richard, or Richard, what should I call you? To the world, I'm still Richard. For you, he hesitated, whatever you prefer. Dad, Melissa said softly. I'd like to try calling you Dad. This time, Richard couldn't hold back the tears. Melissa hugged him, and for a moment, 23 years of absence seemed to shrink. Your mother, Richard managed to say, she'd be proud of you. She'd be proud of both of us, Melissa corrected, for finding each other finally. After Melissa left, Richard wandered aimlessly through the city. New York City at night had its own energy, millions of lives crossing without touching. He had been just another anonymous life for so long. His phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Richard Anderson. Richard, a woman's voice vaguely familiar. It's me, Claire Miller. Richard took a moment to place the name. Claire had been a nurse with Hannah, her close friend. Claire, how did you... Melissa called me. Said you two finally met. Richard, we need to talk. About... Hannah, there are things you need to know. What things? Not over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow? The same place where we used to have coffee. You, me, and Hannah. It's still there. Richard agreed, hanging up with more questions than answers. What else had Hannah hidden? What more would he discover about the lost years? When he finally arrived home, a modest house in Philadelphia he'd rented for years, Richard allowed himself to think about the future for the first time in decades. He had always lived one day at a time, with no plans, no hopes beyond just existing. Now he had a daughter, an inheritance he didn't want, an institute full of families depending on his decision, and apparently more secrets to uncover about the woman he had loved and lost. The next morning, Richard woke with a determination he hadn't felt in years. He called his lawyer, Dr. Samantha. I need you to research everything about the Morrison Blackwood Institute. Finances, projects, people they serve, everything. Have you decided to accept? Not yet, but I need to know what I'd be getting into. Understood. I'll have a full report in 48 hours. Next, he called the general. Arnold, I need a favor. Those journalists who covered Somalia back then, are any still active? A few, why? If I'm going to do this, I want to control the narrative. Tell the whole truth at once. No sensationalism, no half-truths. I can arrange an interview with Melanie Bradshaw. She's serious, respected, did fair coverage of Somalia at the time. Perfect, but only after I've made my decision. The trip back to New York City was reflective. Richard thought about every decision he'd made, every crossroads where he'd chosen isolation. Now the universe seemed to conspire to bring him back. The cafe where he'd meet Claire was near the old military hospital where Hannah had worked. The place had changed little in 3 decades, the same retro style, the same smell of strong coffee. Claire was already there, a woman in her 60s with graying hair and sharp eyes. She stood when she saw him enter. My God, you've aged. Well, all things considered. Claire, they embraced briefly. Thank you for coming. They sat at a corner table away from curious ears. Melissa is beautiful, Claire began. The spitting image of Hannah, but she has your eyes, the same intensity. Did you stay in touch? With them? Always. I was Melissa's godmother, the honorary aunt. Hannah needed support and I did what I could. Claire, what did you need to tell me? The woman sighed, stirring her coffee absently. Hannah got sick 3 years ago. Cancer. That's when she started looking for you in Philadelphia. Melissa mentioned the trips. She wanted to tell you in person about Melissa, about the illness, but every time she saw you working in that shop, finally seeming at peace, she couldn't. Richard felt the familiar weight of guilt. She died without reaching out. No, Claire corrected, she tried. In her last month, when she was already in the hospital, she wrote a letter. Asked me to give it to you, but only if Melissa found you first. She didn't want to force a meeting out of pity or obligation. Claire pulled a yellowed envelope from her bag. The name Richard was written in Hannah's familiar handwriting. Richard took the envelope with trembling hands. Do you want me to leave while you read? Claire offered. No, please stay. Carefully, he opened the envelope. Hannah's writing, slightly shaky from illness, filled his vision. My dearest Richard, if you're reading this, Melissa has finally found you. I hope you've been kind to each other. She inherited your strong temper and my stubborn pride. I need you to know that I never, not for a moment, regretted that month we spent together. It was enough for a lifetime of love. You gave me Melissa, and she was light enough to brighten all my days. I know about Somalia. I know about the impossible choices you had to make. Claire told me about the 3 families, about how you carry this guilt. Stop. Those men were soldiers like you. They made choices like you. The difference is you survived to bear the weight of them. Melissa doesn't know, but I've followed your life from afar all these years. Every medal you refused, every recognition you turned down. I saw when you became Richard Anderson, the mechanic who fixes cars and broken hearts. Yes, I know about the widow of Sergeant Lewis you helped, about the son of Corporal Moore you put through school. You thought you were hiding, but you kept being who you always were, a man who puts others above himself. I won't ask you to look after Melissa, she's strong and independent, but I ask you to let yourself be cared for by her. You both carry wounds that maybe you can heal together. About your father and the Institute, I knew him in his final years. He sought me out, asked forgiveness for what he did to you. He was broken, Richard. Losing you destroyed him more than any dishonor could. The Institute was his way of honoring, not just you, but all soldiers who face impossible choices. Please consider accepting. Not for the inheritance, not for the name, but for the families and for yourself. It's time to stop punishing yourself. Melissa has a box of your things I saved. Photos, medals, even the uniform you wore when we met. She doesn't know, but she also has the letters you wrote me from Liberia. Yes, I received them, even if you think I didn't. Every single one. Live, Richard. For yourself, for Melissa, for all the lives you can still touch. The dead don't need your guilt. The living need your strength. With eternal love, Hannah P.S. Remember that night we promised to dance till dawn when you returned? I'm still waiting for that dance, even if it's in another life. Richard didn't realize he was crying until a tear fell on the paper. Claire gently placed her hand over his. She was at peace in the end, Claire said softly. She spoke of you with so much love, said you two had a complete love story, just condensed into less time than most. I wasted so many years. No, you lived as you needed to live. Hannah understood that. Now it's time to live how you want to. Richard carefully folded the letter, tucking it into the pocket over his heart. Does Melissa know about the other things Hannah kept? Not all. Hannah was selective about what she shared. She wanted Melissa to form her own opinion of you, not based on medals or commendations. Wise as always. Richard, can I be frank? Of course. Hannah would be furious if she knew you spent 23 years punishing yourself. She'd hate knowing you denied yourself any chance at happiness over misplaced guilt. It's not that simple. It never is. But Melissa is here now. The Institute needs someone. You have a chance to honor both Hannah and those soldiers in a meaningful way. Don't waste it. After Claire left, Richard stayed at the cafe for another hour, rereading the letter. Every word was both a balm and a knife. Hannah had forgiven him. No, more than that, she'd never blamed him. All the suffering he'd carried had been self-inflicted. His phone rang. It was Melissa. Dad? The word still sounded strange but welcome. The lab can take us this afternoon for the DNA test. Can you make it? Of course, Melissa, your mother left a letter. I know. Claire called me. Are you okay? The genuine concern in her voice caught him off guard. I'm processing. Your mother was an extraordinary woman. She really was. Listen, after the test, want to have dinner with me? We can talk more without yesterday's pressure. I'd like that. The DNA test was quick and clinical. As they waited in the lobby, Melissa showed him photos of Hannah on her phone. Richard saw the woman he had loved age gracefully, always with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Was she happy? He asked. Truly happy, Melissa thought before answering. I think she was content. There's a difference. She had moments. Show of genuine joy, my graduation when I passed the bar exam, small daily victories, but there was always a sense of something missing. Now I understand what it was. I'm sorry. For everything. I carried that sorrow for a long time too, anger mostly. But you know what I learned from my mother? That holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. She never held any anger toward you. So I decided to follow her example. During dinner at a simple restaurant Melissa had chosen, they talked about smaller things. She told him about her work, her cases, her passion for helping families. Richard spoke about his garage, the classic cars he restored, the quiet life in Philadelphia. You never had anyone? Melissa asked hesitantly. No. I tried a few times, but it always felt wrong, like a betrayal. Of my mother, of myself, of the person I had been. Richard Anderson didn't deserve love. It was part of the punishment. Melissa shook her head. You need therapy. The blunt observation made him laugh, surprised. Probably. Seriously, if you're going to take over the institute dealing with other traumatized families, you need to face your own trauma first. You're assuming I'll accept. You will. I saw how your eyes changed when the general mentioned the soldiers' families. You want to help them. You need to help them. Richard studied his daughter. In just 2 days, she had managed to read him better than most people had in years. You're so much like your mother. Thank you. But I hope I inherited something from you too, besides the stubbornness, of course. The stubbornness is definitely mine, he agreed. Melissa's phone buzzed. She checked the message and her expression shifted. What is it? My cousin, from the Morrison Blackwood side. It seems the news about you being alive and about me has spread through the family. Richard tensed. What does he want? To meet. Says other family members want to as well. Seems you're not the only Morrison Blackwood with regrets. Melissa, that family, it's my family too, she reminded him gently. Grandparents, uncles, cousins I never knew because you chose to disappear. Maybe it's time to face them as well. Richard rubbed his face, weary. Every step he took to resolve one issue seemed to open 2 more. One problem at a time. First the institute, then the family. Agreed. But Richard, Dad, you don't have to do this alone. Not anymore. The simple words carried the weight of a promise. For the first time in 23 years, Richard allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could stop being a ghost. The next day, Dr. Samantha called with the report on the institute. It's solid, she summarized. Well managed. Healthy finances. Your father built a professional structure, but there are interesting clauses in the bylaws. What kind of clauses? Beyond the presidency being hereditary, there's a board of veterans and family members. They have veto. Power over major decisions. And there's a specific project stalled, waiting for the new president's approval. What project? A center for memory and reconciliation, dedicated to preserving stories of conflict but focused on healing and forgiveness. There's an entire wing planned for Somalia. Richard closed his eyes. His father, in the end, had understood. It wasn't about glory or honor in the traditional sense. It was about acknowledging the human cost of impossible decisions. Send everything to me. I'll review it. Richard, as your lawyer, I have to ask, are you seriously considering accepting? I am. God help me, but I am. Dear listener, If you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us tremendously as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The following days passed in a whirlwind. Melissa organized meetings with key members of the Institute. Richard met veterans who had served under his command, widows who wept upon seeing him, and children who had grown up hearing stories about the captain who chose to save kids. Each encounter was both painful and healing. Richard discovered that many had tried to find him over the years, not to blame him but to thank him. The Institute had become a gathering place for those who understood the weight of service. Captain, an elderly veteran, Sergeant Parker, gripped his hand tightly. You taught us that honor sometimes means disobeying. You saved my soul that day by showing me people matter more than protocols. Parker, 3 men died, and 43 children lived. I've done the math every day for 23 years. We still came out ahead, Captain. It was Melissa who arranged the hardest meeting with the families of the 3 fallen soldiers. Richard nearly backed out 3 times on the way, but she stood firm by his side. The gathering took place at the Institute in a private room. 3 women, now in their 50s and 60s, waited. Some of their grown children stood with them. Mrs. Lewis, Mrs. Moore, Mrs. Smith. Richard could barely speak. Stop. Mrs. Lewis, the eldest, rose. Before you say anything, we want you to know we hold no grudge, we never did. My John died saving children, Mrs. Moore added. Children, Captain. Do you think he'd have rather died for territory? For politics? Mrs. Smith, the quietest, finally spoke. My Charles sent a letter 2 days before, said he finally understood why he'd enlisted, said he'd follow you to hell if it meant making a difference. He made a difference, Captain. Thanks to you. Richard couldn't hold back his tears. Melissa held his hand as he wept for 23 years of buried guilt. The widows drew closer, and soon they were all embracing, crying together. The Institute has been our home, Mrs. Lewis said when they'd composed themselves. Your father took care of us when you couldn't, but we always knew you'd come back someday. Good men always do. After that meeting, Richard knew there was no turning back. He couldn't abandon those people, those families who had turned tragedy into purpose. The official decision came a week later, during dinner with Melissa, General Sullivan, and Mrs. Martha. I'll accept, Richard announced. I'll reclaim the name Morrison Blackwood and chair the Institute. Melissa smiled proudly. The general clapped him on the back. Your mother would be proud, Mrs. Martha said, and Richard knew she didn't. Just mean Hannah. There are conditions, Richard continued. First, I'll do it my way. No pomp, no unnecessary spotlight. Second, Melissa will be vice president if she accepts. What? Melissa nearly knocked over her glass. Dad, I don't know the first thing about running an institute. But you know about families, about justice, about healing old wounds. You're a lawyer. You have the training. And more importantly, your heart's in the right place. Melissa looked around the table for support, but found only encouraging smiles. This is crazy. The whole situation is crazy, Richard noted, but it's our kind of crazy. What do you say, kiddo, ready to rebuild a legacy with me? Melissa took a deep breath, then extended her hand. I'm in, but we do it our way. Wouldn't expect anything less from a Morrison Blackwood. Richard shook her hand, sealing the deal. The transition wasn't easy. The media, as expected, had a field day with the story. Forgotten hero returns. The captain who chose children. 2-decade mystery solved. Richard gave a single interview to Melanie Bradshaw as agreed, where he told the truth without embellishment. The response was overwhelmingly positive. The United States had changed in 23 years. The story of a soldier who disobeyed orders to save lives resonated with a public tired of scandals and corruption, but it was inside the Institute that the real change happened. Richard brought his practical experience, his visceral understanding of trauma. Melissa brought fresh energy, new ideas, and a natural ability to connect generations. The Memory Center project was approved unanimously. Richard insisted it include not just Somalia, but all missions where Americans had served. Melissa suggested a wing dedicated to families, not just those who had lost someone, but also those who had lived with absence like herself. 3 months after taking over the Institute, Richard received an unexpected visit. He was in his new office, still uneasy with the spaciousness after years in his small workshop, when his secretary announced, "Mr. Morrison Blackwood, there's a woman insisting on seeing you. She says it's urgent. Her name is Hope Dawson." The name struck him like lightning. Hope had been the director of St. Mary's Home in Somalia, the woman he hadn't seen since that fateful morning in 2000. Send her in. The woman who entered appeared to be in her 70s, but carried the same dignified posture Richard remembered. Her hair, now completely white, was tied back in the same severe bun. But it was her eyes that caught him. They still held that same mix of strength and compassion. "Captain Richard," she said in heavily accented English. "Or should I say Mr. Richard now?" "Hope?" Richard stood, moved. "How did you find me?" "I saw the interview. I recognized you immediately. I came as soon as I could." They embraced, too, survivors of a day that had changed so many lives. "Why now, after all this time?" Hope smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. "Because some of those children you saved want to meet you. They're grown now with families of their own, and they want to thank the man who chose their lives above all else." Richard felt his legs weaken. He sat down heavily. They're all right? "Thanks to you, yes. Doctors, teachers, even a priest. 43 lives that flourished because you made a choice. 3 soldiers died for that choice. And they are honored too. At the orphanage, now a school, there's a plaque with their names. The children learn about sacrifice through their story." Melissa, who had been alerted about the unusual visitor, entered the office. "Dad, is everything all right?" "Melissa, this is Hope Dawson. She ran the orphanage in Somalia." Melissa's eyes widened, immediately grasping the significance. "Mrs. Dawson, it's an honor. The honor is mine to meet the captain's daughter. You have his eyes, the same determination." "Hope," Richard steadied himself. "These children, adults now, they really want to see me." "Desperately, Mary. You must remember her, the oldest. She's a pediatrician now. She organized everyone. They've been saving for years for this trip." "Trip?" "They're all here in New York City. 43 adults who owe their lives to you. I came first to prepare you, but they're at a nearby hotel waiting." Richard covered his face with his hands. It was too much. After years carrying the weight of that day, to learn that the lives he saved had thrived. "When?" was all he could ask. "Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow? Later? They've waited 23 years. They can wait." "A little longer," Melissa gently intervened. "How about tomorrow evening, here at the Institute? We can arrange a proper reception." Hope smiled. "Perfect. Oh, Captain, there's something else." She pulled a thick envelope from her purse. "Letters. Each of them wrote to you over the years. I kept them all, hoping one day I could deliver them." Richard took the envelope with reverence. 43 lives, 43 stories, all connected to that terrible and miraculous day. After Hope left, father and daughter sat in silence for long minutes. "How are you?" Melissa finally asked. "I don't know. I spent 23 years defining myself by guilt. Now, I don't know who I am anymore." "You're my father," Melissa said simply. "You're the president of this institute. You're a man who made an impossible choice and saved lives. You're someone who deserves forgiveness, especially from yourself." That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He read each letter, weeping openly. Mary, the 15-year-old girl he had shielded with his own body, wrote about every young patient she saved while thinking of him. John, the 8-year-old boy who had been feverish during the attack, had become a teacher and named his son Richard. Story after story of lives that had found purpose in the second chance they'd been given. The last letter was signed by all. "Captain Richard, we are your 43 miracles. We live each day knowing it was a gift from you. We hope to look into your eyes and say, it was worth it. Your choice was worth it." The next day, the Institute buzzed with preparations. Melissa coordinated everything with impressive efficiency, while Richard tried to stay busy to avoid overthinking. "Did you invite the soldiers' families?" he asked Melissa. "All confirmed they'd be here. They said they wouldn't miss it for anything." "And the general?" "He and Mrs. Sullivan will arrive early to support you." At 7 in the evening, Richard stood in the Institute's main hall, trying to steady his nerves. He wore a simple suit. He had refused anything resembling a military uniform. When the doors opened and the group entered, led by Hope, Richard had to lean on Melissa for support. 43 adults, many with spouses and children, filled the room, but he could still see the children they had been in their grown faces. Mary stepped forward first. The skinny 15-year-old girl was now a confident 38-year-old woman. "Captain," she said in clear English, "I've practiced this sentence for 20 years. Thank you for choosing our lives." One by one they came forward. Each had their story, an achievement, a full life to share. John showed pictures of his son Richard. Others spoke of careers, families, dreams fulfilled. It was when little Sophie, now a 26-year-old teacher, spoke that Richard finally broke completely. "Sir, I was 3. I don't remember the attack, but my adoptive mother told me how you carried me for 2 hours while fighting, because I was too injured to walk. Your back was scarred because you shielded me from the bullets. Because of that, I became a teacher for special needs children. Every child I help is a way to honor your sacrifice." The families of the fallen soldiers, who had watched everything, in respectful silence stepped forward. Mrs. Lewis spoke for them all. "Our men died for this," she gestured to the group. "For this moment, thank you for showing their sacrifice had meaning." The evening stretched on with stories, tears, and surprisingly, laughter. The 43, as they called themselves, had formed a bond. They held yearly reunions, supported each other, and kept the memory of that day alive, not with horror but with gratitude. "We started a foundation," Mary explained. "Small, but we help orphans in Somalia. We call it the Three Heroes Foundation, in honor of the American soldiers." Richard had to step away for a moment, overwhelmed. Melissa followed him to the terrace. "It's too much," he confessed. "I carried the guilt for so long, and now—" "Now you can carry the pride too," Melissa completed. "Both can coexist, Dad, the pain of loss and the joy for what was saved. Your mother would say the same thing." Probably with better words, Melissa smiled, but the feeling would be the same. When they returned, they found a surprise. The 43 had organized themselves into an impromptu choir and began to sing. It was a Somali song of gratitude, their voices joining in imperfect yet deeply moving harmony. Then came another surprise. John stepped forward with a wrapped object. "Captain, this belongs to you." Richard carefully unwrapped it and nearly fell. It was the American flag that had flown over the orphanage during the siege, riddled with bullet holes but carefully preserved. "We kept it all these years," John explained, "to return it when we found you. It's not a symbol of the United States, but of the American who chose what was right over what was easy." The improvised ceremony lasted well into the evening. When the guests finally began to leave, each of the 43 made sure to have a private moment with Richard. Some cried, others simply shook his hand, but all conveyed the same message: "You made a difference." Hope was the last to approach. "They needed this," she said, "and so did you. Now both of you can move forward without the weight of what if." "Hope? How did you do it? Keep the faith? Keep the orphanage running after everything?" "Because you showed me that miracles happen when good people make hard choices. I turned the orphanage into a school because education is the best way to honor sacrifice. Every child who graduates is a victory against violence." After everyone had left, Richard and Melissa stood alone in the empty hall. The bullet-riddled flag lay on the table, a silent witness to a day that defined so many lives. "What will you do with it?" Melissa asked. "Place it in the memorial center, with the names of the 3 soldiers and the 43 children, so everyone remembers that heroism has many faces and always comes at a cost. My mother would have loved tonight." "She's here." Richard touched his chest, where Hannah's letter remained. "In you, in me, in every life we've touched." The following months brought profound changes. The story of the reunion went viral, bringing positive attention to the Institute. Donations increased, allowing them to expand their programs. Melissa proved to be a natural administrator, bringing innovation while respecting tradition. Richard, in turn, found a purpose he had lost. He personally visited every family they supported, listened to their stories, and ensured no one was forgotten. His experience as a mechanic surprisingly helped. He understood how to fix broken things, whether machines or lives. A year after taking over the Institute, they faced their most unexpected challenge. Robert Morrison Blackwood, Richard's cousin and the presumed heir before his return, legally contested the inheritance. He abandoned the family, Robert argued in a tense family meeting. He can't just come back and take everything. I don't want everything, Richard replied calmly. Just the Institute, the rest can stay with you. This isn't about money, Robert exploded. It's about honor. You tarnished our name. Melissa, who had developed little patience for her arrogant cousin, intervened. Honor? You want to talk about honor? 43 people are alive because of my father. Hundreds of families are supported by the Institute your uncle created in redemption. What honor have you brought to the name besides lawsuits and greed? The family. Matriarch Mrs. Elizabeth Morrison Blackwood, Richard's 92-year-old aunt, struck her cane on the floor. Enough, Robert. Sit down. Richard, come here. Richard approached the aunt he hadn't seen in over 2 decades. You look like your father, she observed. The same stubbornness, the same inconvenient sense of justice. He came to me before. He died, you know? No. He said his biggest regret was losing his son to pride, that he'd rather have a living, disgraced son than an honored name and a lost child. The Institute was his way of making amends to you and those soldiers. She turned to Robert. You want to talk about honor? Your cousin saved children. What have you saved? Increased the family fortune, congratulations, but legacy isn't measured in dollars. Grandma Elizabeth, Robert tried. Quiet. My brother's decision stands. Richard takes over the Institute and his share of the enterprises. If he chooses to give up the rest, that's his decision. But you, Robert, will learn what true honor is. You'll work at the Institute for 1 year. Without pay, you'll meet every family, hear every story, then we'll talk about tarnishing the family name. Robert turned pale but didn't dare challenge the matriarch. And you, she turned to Richard, stop running from the family. We've made mistakes, yes, but that's what family is. We err together and redeem ourselves together. Your daughter understands that better than you. Melissa smiled discreetly. She'd won over the formidable Mrs. Elizabeth Morrison Blackwood on her first visit. Proving diplomacy was another family inheritance. Robert's integration into the Institute was, predictably, difficult at first. The 45-year-old man, accustomed to corporate boardrooms, found himself dealing with traumatized veterans and struggling families. It was Melissa who suggested pairing him directly with John Charles, a 28-year-old veteran who'd lost his leg in Sierra Leone. Why him? Robert had protested. Because John's the same age as your son, Melissa replied, and because he has no patience for nonsense. He'll teach you about real sacrifice. 3 months later, Richard found Robert crying in the Institute's restroom. What happened? John told me about the day he lost his leg. He saved an entire school from a terrorist attack. Know what he said? That he'd do it again 1,000 times over. That his leg was a small price for the lives saved. Robert looked at his cousin with new eyes. I've been a fool, Richard. I spent my life measuring honor in surnames and wealth, while people like you and John defined honor with blood and impossible choices. We all have our moments of clarity, Richard answered. What matters is what we do with them. I want to stay at the Institute, with or without pay. I've learned more about our family in 3 months here than in 45 years carrying the name. Robert's transformation was profound and genuine. He became one of the Institute's strongest advocates, using his corporate connections to expand its reach and resources. The Memorial Center opened 2 years after Richard took over the Institute. The ceremony brought together veterans, families, the 43 from Somalia, and government representatives. The president attended, officially recognizing the sacrifice of all involved that day in Mogadishu. Melissa had insisted on a special section, the present absent, dedicated to those who, like Hannah, had waited silently for their loved one's return. Every story here is about choices, Richard said in his speech, visibly moved. Choices to serve, to sacrifice, to forgive, to wait. This center exists to remind us that behind every uniform, every tough decision, there's a person, a family, a story that deserves to be told and honored. The bullet-riddled flag from Somalia stood at the center, surrounded by photos of the 3 fallen soldiers and the 43 rescued children, now thriving adults. Claire, Hannah's friend, had donated all the letters Richard wrote from Liberia, the ones Hannah had secretly kept. They were digitized and included in an exhibition about love in wartime. She replied, "You know," Claire revealed to Richard during the opening. For every letter you sent, she wrote a response. She never mailed them because she didn't know where to send them, but she wrote them. She kept them all. They're here too. Richard spent hours reading Hannah's unsent replies, conversations of a love interrupted but never forgotten. In one of them, dated when Melissa was 5, Hannah wrote, "Richard, today Melissa asked why. The sky is blue. I answered with science, but she insisted it was because God knew blue was my favorite color. I remembered you saying the same thing that afternoon by the lake. She has your romanticism disguised as logic. I hope one day you can see her." The success of the Morrison Blackwood Institute under Richard and Melissa's leadership drew international attention. Invitations for lectures and conferences came constantly, but Richard was selective. He preferred hands-on work with families. It was during one of these refusals that something unexpected happened. The UN, organizing a symposium on ethical decisions in armed conflicts, insisted so much that Melissa intervened. "Dad, this time you should go." "Why? I have nothing new to say about Somalia." "It's not about Somalia. Look at the speaker list." Richard scanned the names and froze. Colonel John Morrison, former commander of UN forces in Mogadishu in 2000. The man who had given the order not to intervene. "I can't." "You need to. It's been 24 years. Maybe it's time to hear the other side. He condemned 43 children to death, and he's lived with that ever since. I've read about him, Dad. He retired right after Somalia, has worked with refugees ever since. Maybe he needs redemption too." Richard resisted, but eventually agreed. The trip to Geneva was tense. Melissa insisted on going with him, fearing what the encounter might stir. The symposium was impressive, gathering military personnel, academics, and human rights activists. Richard was met with near reverent respect. His story had become a case study in military ethics. The meeting with Morrison happened on the second day, in a convention center hallway. The American, now 70, approached hesitantly. Captain Blackwood, Colonel Morrison. The two men sized each other up. Morrison seemed to have aged beyond his years, carrying his own burden. "Can we talk? In private?" Richard hesitated, but Melissa gently touched his arm in support. He agreed. In the makeshift office, Morrison was direct. "I've spent 24 years wanting to apologize to you, and 24 years knowing I don't have that right. Why did you give that order?" Morrison ran a hand over his weary face. "Politics, there was a deal. Militia leaders guaranteed safe passage for our convoys if we didn't interfere in internal matters. 43 children were considered an internal matter. And you accepted that?" "To my eternal shame, yes. When you disobeyed, when you saved those children, you did what I should have done, what I didn't have the courage to do. 3 of my men died. I know. I visit their graves every year when I'm in the US. I bring flowers. The families don't know who I am, but it's my penance." Richard was stunned. This man, whom he had demonized for decades, had carried his own cross. "Why did you retire? How could I stay? After seeing an American captain do what an American colonel couldn't. I've dedicated my life since then to trying to make amends. It'll never be enough, but it's all I can do." Silence stretched between them. It was Melissa who broke it. "Mr. Morrison, do you know the 3 Heroes Foundation?" "The foundation? Created by the rescued children?" "Of course. I'm one of the main anonymous donors." Another surprise. Richard realized he had oversimplified the story all these years. Mitchell wasn't a villain, just another man who had made the wrong choice and lived with the consequences. "Colonel," Richard finally said, "what happened, happened. I can't forgive on behalf of the dead, but I can acknowledge that we all made choices that day, some right, some wrong. What matters is what we do afterward." Mitchell nodded, tears in his eyes. Thank you. It's more than I deserve. After the symposium, Richard was invited to visit the International Blue Helmets Memorial. There he discovered a discreet but meaningful plaque. In memory of the American soldiers, Lewis, Moore and Smith, who gave their lives saving innocents beyond the call of duty. Mitchell did this, the guide explained. Paid for it himself, fought through bureaucracy, said it was the least he could do to honor true soldiers of peace. Back in the United States, Richard shared the experience with the soldiers' families. The reaction was mixed, but Mrs. Lewis summed up the general feeling. It doesn't erase what happened, but it shows their sacrifice touched even those who gave the wrong orders. My John changed an American colonel. There's power in that. The Institute continued to grow. Melissa implemented innovative programs, including psychological support for veterans' children and an oral history project where veterans recorded their experiences. Richard, growing more comfortable in his role, became a respected voice on veterans' issues, but he kept his humility, always remembering that the real work happened day by day, not in the spotlight. 5 years after taking over the Institute, they faced a crisis. A fund embezzlement scandal at another veterans organization cast suspicion on the entire sector. Donations dropped. The media questioned everything. We need to open everything up, Melissa suggested in an emergency meeting. Total transparency, every penny, every decision. That's unprecedented, the accountant protested. Then we'll be the first, Richard decided. If we ask for trust, we have to earn it. The decision was risky but worked. The Morrison Blackwood Institute became a model of transparency. Others followed their example, restoring public trust. It was during this crisis that Robert proved his transformation once and for all. He used his corporate contacts and skills to create an emergency fund, ensuring no family went without support. It's the least, he told Richard. I've learned that honoring the family name means more than preserving it. It means using it to do good. Mrs. Elizabeth Morrison Blackwood, who had been closely following everything despite her advanced age, called a family meeting. I'm old, she announced bluntly. Soon I won't be here to keep this family together, but I see now that I don't need to. Richard and Melissa have shown the way. Robert has learned. The name Morrison Blackwood means something again. It means service, it means hard choices, it means redemption. She looked at each family member present. Carry this forward, not the weight of the past, but the promise of the future. And remember, honor isn't inherited, it's earned. Every generation, every person, every day. The meeting ended with something the family hadn't done in decades. A group embrace, shared tears, forgiveness offered and accepted. That night, Richard and Melissa walked through the Institute's gardens. The Memorial Center was lit up, open, for evening visitors. We did it, Dad, Melissa said softly. We turned pain into purpose. Your mother did it, Richard corrected. She kept faith when I lost it, raised you when I wasn't there, planted the seeds we're now harvesting. She'd be proud. She would, and maybe at last I can be too. They entered the Memorial Center, where the tattered flag of Somalia fluttered softly in the air conditioning. Around them, stories of sacrifice, love, loss, and redemption. Each one unique, all connected by the invisible thread of humanity in its darkest hours. Richard stopped before the section dedicated to Hannah. Melissa had created a touching installation. The exchanged but unsent letters projected in a loop, words of love floating like butterflies of light. You know, Richard said, for years I thought I'd lost everything. My name, my honor, my love. But I was wrong. It was all here, waiting. Transformed perhaps, but waiting. And now we live. We honor the dead by living fully. We serve because we can. We love because it's what makes us human. Melissa embraced her father, and for a moment, 3 generations were there. Hannah in her eternal letters, Richard in his late redemption, Melissa in her youthful strength. The past redeemed, the present embraced, the future promising. Outside, New York City pulsed with its relentless nighttime rhythm, but inside the Morrison Blackwood Institute, inside the Memorial Center, inside the hearts of those touched by impossible choices and immortal love, there was peace. Richard Anderson had died in the courtroom that day years ago, But Richard Morrison Blackwood, father, leader, redeemed man, had been born. And with him, proof that it's never too late to come home, even when home is a place you must build with your own hands, brick by brick of forgiveness and purpose. End of story. Dear listener, were you moved by Richard's journey? Sometimes true heroism lies in facing our ghosts and choosing forgiveness. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments and leave your like. Subscribe for more stories that prove it's never too late to start again.